A car sits parked on a quiet, wooded street on the edge of Moscow. The windows are fogged. It is November 1982, and snow is falling. Inside, a man's voice is rising. A woman is screaming. The man throws open the door and steps into the cold, a bloody knife in his hand. A stranger walking nearby has heard the screaming. He knocks on the window, trying to help. He has no idea what he is about to walk into. The man turns. The knife comes down. Seconds later, the stranger is dead in the snow. The woman is still alive, bleeding, screaming for help. And the man standing over both of them is not a criminal in the way the police are about to assume. He is a colonel of the KGB. He holds one of the most sensitive jobs inside Soviet intelligence. And for the past 18 months, he has secretly been feeding France and the United States the largest haul of Soviet espionage secrets in the history of the Cold War. In a few minutes, police will arrest him for murder. They have no idea they are also about to catch, completely by accident, the most damaging mole in Soviet history. His name is Vladimir Vetrov. The French called him Farewell. This is his story. Vladimir Ippolitovich Vetrov was born in October 1932. He trained as an engineer, sharp with machines and numbers. The KGB noticed. They recruited him for a very specific kind of war, not tanks, not missiles. The quiet war of stolen blueprints. By the 1960s, Vetrov was posted to Paris, working under diplomatic cover for a KGB unit called Directorate T. Its mission was simple: steal Western technology, hand it to Soviet industry. Its operational arm was called Line X. In Paris, Vetrov lived a life most Soviet citizens could not imagine. Store shelves full, streets clean, ordinary French families living better than senior Soviet officials back home. He made friends there, a French engineer named Jacques Prévost among them. He watched how the West actually worked. Something in him started to shift. When his posting ended, he went home to Moscow. He rose through Directorate T until he landed at the very center of the operation, evaluating the stolen intelligence Line X officers were sending in from around the world. American microchips, radar blueprints, aerospace research worth billions. It all crossed his desk. He should have been proud. Instead, he grew bitter. Promotions went to men with connections, not results. The system he had given his career to was, in his own words, rotten through and through. By 1980, Vladimir Vetrov had made a decision that could get him killed. He was not looking for money. He wanted to hurt the system from the inside, and he knew exactly how to do it. Using old contacts from his Paris years, Vetrov reached out to French intelligence, the DST. In April 1981, the French finally understood what they were being offered. They gave him a code name, Farewell, chosen deliberately in English, so that if the KGB ever intercepted it, they would assume their traitor was working for the Americans, not the French. Vetrov made one condition clear from the start. He did not want to defect. He did not want to leave Moscow. He wanted to stay exactly where he was, inside the KGB, at his own desk, surrounded by his own colleagues, and keep bleeding the agency from within for as long as he possibly could. That meant living a double life every single day, passing documents in brief, careful handoffs, walking back into KGB headquarters afterward, greeting the same officers he had just betrayed, knowing that one slipped word, one suspicious glance from the wrong person, could end with him in a Lefortovo prison cell. He never knew from one meeting to the next if he was being followed. Over the following months, Farewell handed the DST something almost unimaginable. Nearly 4,000 classified documents. Among them, the complete roster of 250 Line X officers stationed under diplomatic cover in embassies around the world. Names, postings, assignments, the entire skeleton of Soviet technology theft laid bare, one photographed page at a time. He was offered money. Reluctantly, he accepted a payment worth roughly 4 years of his salary. But everyone who worked the case agreed on one thing. This was never really about the rubles. By the summer of 1981, the Farewell documents had crossed the Atlantic. In Washington, they were locked inside CIA vaults under a code name of their own, Kudo. Only a handful of officials were even permitted to read them. What those documents revealed stunned hardened Cold War analysts. The Soviet military buildup, the technological leaps that had puzzled the West for years. None of it was innovation. It was theft on an industrial scale. And the West had been footing part of the bill without even knowing it. France moved first. On the 5th of April 1983, the French government expelled 47 Soviet intelligence officers in a single, coordinated sweep. Most of them Line X operatives Vetrov himself had identified. It was one of the largest mass expulsions of the entire Cold War. Across the West, the pattern repeated. Nation after nation quietly rolled up Soviet technology networks. In total, close to 150 operatives were expelled or exposed. Their careers ended by information one disillusioned colonel had smuggled out of Moscow, one meeting at a time. But the most devastating part of Vetrov's betrayal wasn't the arrests. It was what came next. Inside Washington, officials realized they didn't have to simply shut Line X down. They could turn it into a weapon. If the Soviets were determined to steal Western technology, the West would let them, and quietly poison what they stole. Flawed computer chips, defective turbine designs, compromised software, engineered to fail, fed straight into the KGB's own collection pipeline, trusted completely, because for years Line X had never once been wrong. For a system built entirely on theft, being unable to trust what it stole was its own kind of collapse. And Vetrov kept going back to work, every single day. He sat across the table from colleagues who trusted him completely. He evaluated intelligence reports, signed off on assessments, walked the same corridors of the KGB's first chief directorate, knowing that every document he touched might already be compromised because of him. No training could have prepared a man to live like that for 18 straight months. Something, eventually, was going to give. By the autumn of 1982, it did. Vetrov was carrying on an affair with a woman named Ludmila. On a cold November night, driving through a wooded street on the edge of Moscow, an argument between them turned violent. Witnesses would later struggle to explain exactly how it started. What is certain is this. Vetrov pulled a knife. A passerby heard Ludmila's screams and knocked on the car window trying to help. Vetrov turned on him instead. Within seconds, the stranger lay dying in the snow. Vetrov fled the scene. Then, in a decision that still puzzles historians of the case, he came back. Police arriving at the scene were stunned to find the man voluntarily returning to face them. They were even more stunned when Ludmila, bleeding but alive, pointed him out as her attacker. They searched him. The knife was still in his coat. To the officers standing there in the snow, this was an ugly but simple case. A KGB colonel, a mistress, a jealous rage, a dead bystander. Soviet authorities charged him with murder and, wanting to avoid embarrassment, prosecuted him quietly as an ordinary criminal. He was sentenced to 15 years and shipped off to a labor camp in Irkutsk, deep in Siberia. Not one investigator in that courtroom had the slightest idea that the man they had just sentenced for a crime of passion was, at that very moment, the most valuable Western intelligence asset inside the Soviet Union. For nearly a year, the secret held. It should have ended there. A spy who got unlucky, buried in a labor camp for a crime that had nothing to do with espionage. Instead, Vetrov made one more decision that sealed his fate. Isolated, angry, perhaps unable to resist one final act of defiance, he began talking, slowly, carefully. Pieces of what he had done started to surface, first as rumors, then as something Soviet investigators could no longer ignore. By the fall of 1983, with help from Ludmila, the KGB finally connected the threads. The colonel serving 15 years for murder in Irkutsk was also Farewell, the source who had gutted Line X, the man who had handed the West its greatest technological intelligence coup of the Cold War. He was pulled out of the labor camp in total secrecy and brought back to Moscow, placed in an isolation cell inside Lefortovo prison, the KGB's own interrogation facility. There would be no ordinary trial this time. Under interrogation, Vetrov confessed. He was told, according to later accounts, that a full confession might spare his life. He wrote a document that would later become known as the Confession of a Traitor, a searing denunciation of the Soviet system he had spent a career serving, and ultimately spent that same career trying to destroy. He was tried again, this time by the Supreme Court of the Soviet Union, convicted of treason. On the 23rd of January 1985, Vladimir Vetrov was executed in Moscow. He was 52 years old. His remains were never returned to his family. In France, the news didn't arrive until March. Weeks later, filtering back through intelligence channels to the handlers who had once sat across from him, reading his documents by lamplight, the man who had reshaped the balance of Cold War intelligence was gone. For years, most of the world had no idea his name had ever mattered at all. What he left behind was almost impossible to measure. The Farewell Dossier didn't just expose a spy ring. It confirmed, in devastating detail, exactly how dependent the Soviet economy had become on stolen Western innovation, evidence that would go on to shape the Reagan administration's push to economically outpace Moscow in the years that followed. Vetrov also handed the West something else entirely: the identity of Dieter Gerhardt, a senior South African naval officer who had secretly spied for the Soviets for 20 years. One confession, cracking open two entirely separate betrayals. Historians still debate his motives. Was it ideology? A man who had seen the West and could no longer pretend the Soviet system was worth defending? Was it resentment? A talented officer passed over, again and again, by a system built on connections instead of merit? Most likely, it was both, tangled together with a restlessness that, in the end, also made him reckless enough to pull a knife on a stranger in the snow. He was never a clean hero. He was a killer, and Moscow never forgave him for either of his crimes, the murder or the betrayal. But for 18 months, one disillusioned colonel did more damage to Soviet intelligence than entire agencies had managed in decades. He wanted to say farewell to a system he no longer believed in. In the end, it said farewell to him first. Some stories cross borders the way secrets once did. If you're listening tonight, drop a comment and tell us what part of the world this story reached you from.